When Chris discovers his wife Lisa's months-long affair, his world shatters. Fueled by anger and betrayal, he meticulously plans to confront her, exposing her lies and forcing her to face the consequences. But the confrontation takes an unexpected turn, and Lisa flees into the night, leading to a tragic accident that leaves Chris grappling with guilt and regret. As he tries to pick up the pieces for the sake of their children, Chris must confront not only his pain but the haunting question: could things have ended differently? A story of love, betrayal, and the devastating ripple effects of choices, this tale explores the fragile lines between justice, forgiveness, and tragedy. The routine was comforting in its predictability. Every second Tuesday, Lisa would leave the house around 7 p.m., dressed smartly but not provocatively, clutching a copy of whatever book her club was supposedly discussing. "Don't wait up," she'd always say, planting a perfunctory kiss on my cheek before heading out. It had become part of the rhythm of our lives, and I never thought to question it. That Tuesday was no different. After she left, I stayed in the kitchen, packing the kids' lunches for the next day and listening to the faint hum of the dishwasher. Our two children, Emma and Noah, were upstairs, their laughter mingling with the sound of some TV show. It was a life I'd built carefully, steady, stable, dependable. But in hindsight, maybe it had been too much so. As I finished cleaning up, Lisa's iPad buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, expecting some mundane notification about a sale or a recipe. Instead, it was a message preview from someone I didn't recognize: Jason from work. "Can't stop thinking about last night." I froze. The words seemed to burn themselves into my mind. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Then, with a trembling hand, I picked up the iPad. It wasn't locked. My breath hitched as I opened the messaging app and scrolled through the thread. The messages were casual at first, banter about work, complaints about the boss. But as I kept scrolling, they became something else entirely. Jason wasn't just a colleague. He was someone she'd been seeing, someone she'd met on evenings when she was supposed to be at book club. "I loved the way you kissed me goodbye," one message read. "It's like I can still feel your lips." Another said, "I can't wait until Friday. I've already booked the hotel room. It'll be perfect." A cold dread settled over me. My wife wasn't just lying about book club, she was planning to meet this man in a few days. I felt the room spin, the air thick and suffocating. For a moment, I thought I might be sick. I set the iPad down, my hands trembling. My first instinct was to confront her, to demand an explanation. But something held me back. A quiet, insidious voice whispered in my ear, "You don't know the whole story yet. Don't show your cards until you're ready." That night, I lay awake long after Lisa returned home. She slipped into bed beside me, her movements calm and unhurried, as if nothing had changed. The faint scent of her perfume wafted toward me, subtle, floral, familiar. It felt like a mockery. I turned my back to her, pretending to be asleep. In the days that followed, I became a man on a mission. I wasn't ready to confront Lisa yet, but I couldn't sit idly by either. I needed evidence, something irrefutable, something that would make her lies unravel. I started small, installing a keylogger on her phone. It wasn't difficult, I knew her passcode by heart. From there, I accessed her texts, emails, and even her location history. What I found only confirmed my worst fears. She and Jason had been meeting for months. Their messages were filled with inside jokes, flirtations, and plans for future rendezvous. One text from Jason read, "I wish you'd just leave him. We'd be so much happier together." Her response had been quick, almost eager, "It's not that simple. Chris is a good man. He doesn't deserve this." I clenched my fists as I read that. So she knew I didn't deserve it, and yet she did it anyway. The betrayal stung more than I thought possible. I tracked her movements through the GPS on her phone. On her next book club night, she didn't go to the local library where the club supposedly met. Instead, she drove to a wine bar downtown. I followed her in my car, parking a block away and watching as she entered the bar and embraced Jason, a tall, clean-shaven man with an air of arrogance. The sight of them together was like a knife to my chest. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, fighting the urge to storm in and make a scene. Not yet, I told myself. Not like this. As I sat in the car, I began to plan. I didn't want to just catch her in the act, I wanted to ensure there was no way she could deny it. I wanted her to see what she'd thrown away and regret every moment of it. That night, after she came home and went to bed, I poured myself a drink and stared out the window. The street was quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. My mind churned with thoughts of revenge, of justice, of how I could take back control of my life. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. Not without a fight. The morning after I saw Lisa and Jason together, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. My emotions were still a storm, a churning mix of betrayal, rage, and despair, but beneath it all was a cold, focused resolve. I had a plan now, a purpose. And that purpose was to take back control of my life. I started the day as I always did, making coffee, packing the kids' lunches, and pretending everything was fine. Lisa joined me in the kitchen, still wearing the same serene mask she'd perfected over the years. She kissed me on the cheek, and I had to fight the urge to recoil. "You okay?" she asked, her tone casual. "You look a little tired." "Just didn't sleep well," I replied, forcing a smile. "Work stress." She nodded sympathetically, completely oblivious. Or maybe she wasn't. Maybe she knew I was onto her, and this was all part of her game. Either way, I wasn't going to let her see me crack. After dropping the kids off at school, I headed straight to a private investigator's office. His name was Mark Sullivan, and he came highly recommended by an old college friend who'd gone through a messy divorce. Mark was in his late 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a sharp, assessing gaze that made it clear he didn't miss much. "I need proof," I said after explaining my situation. "Something concrete. Photos, videos, anything." Mark leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "You sure about this? Once you open this door, there's no closing it." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "She's been lying to me for months. I need to know the full extent of it." Mark nodded. "Fair enough. I'll tail her, gather evidence, and let you know what I find. Just so you know, this kind of thing doesn't come cheap." "Money isn't an issue," I replied. And it wasn't. Lisa and I had always lived comfortably, and I had more than enough in my personal savings to cover whatever Mark needed. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the mundane routines of life, work, school pickups, dinner, while Mark worked in the background, uncovering the details of Lisa's affair. Every time she left the house, I knew Mark was following her. Every time her phone buzzed, I wondered if it was Jason. The waiting was torture. I wanted answers, but I also dreaded them. What if it was worse than I imagined? What if there were other men? What if Jason wasn't just a fling but someone she was planning to leave me for? Then, on Thursday afternoon, Mark called. "I've got what you need," he said. "Can you meet me at my office?" I left work early, my heart pounding as I drove across town. When I arrived, Mark greeted me with a grim expression and handed me a manila envelope. "Photos, timestamps, locations," he said. "It's all in there." I opened the envelope and flipped through the contents. There were pictures of Lisa and Jason at the wine bar, walking hand in hand down the street, and kissing in a hotel parking lot. There was even a receipt from the hotel, with Jason's name and signature on it. "This is thorough," I said, my voice tight. Mark shrugged. "You wanted proof. Now you've got it." I left his office feeling both vindicated and hollow. I had the evidence I needed, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I'd hoped for. Instead, it felt like a death sentence for the life I'd worked so hard to build. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Lisa had gone to bed. The envelope lay in front of me, its contents spilling out like a confession. I stared at the photos, the timestamps, the damning truth of it all, and felt the weight of what I had to do next. The following morning, I began preparing for the confrontation. But I didn't want to just catch Lisa in a lie, I wanted her to see the full extent of her betrayal. I wanted her to realize that she'd underestimated me, that I wasn't the clueless husband she thought I was. I printed out the photos and the hotel receipt, slipping them into a folder. Then I called my lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Rachel Porter who specialized in family law. She agreed to meet me that afternoon. Rachel was efficient and empathetic, listening carefully as I explained the situation. When I showed her the evidence, she nodded approvingly. "This will make things much easier in court," she said. "Judges don't look kindly on infidelity, especially when there's concrete proof." "What about custody?" I asked. "I want to make sure I keep the kids." "With this evidence and your clean record, that shouldn't be a problem," Rachel assured me. "But we'll need to act quickly. The sooner we file, the better." By the time I left her office, I had a clear roadmap for the days ahead. File for divorce, secure custody of the kids, and protect my financial assets. It was a cold, methodical plan, but it was the only way to protect myself and my children from the fallout. That evening, Lisa came home from work with her usual smile, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was. I played along, pretending everything was normal. But inside, I was counting down the hours until I could finally confront her. The reckoning was coming, and there was no turning back. Friday night arrived, and with it, the sense of inevitability I had been bracing for all week. I had planned every detail of the confrontation. Lisa was supposed to go out that evening, to Jason, of course, and I decided it was time for her carefully constructed house of cards to collapse. Lisa was in the bathroom when I set everything up in the living room. The folder with the evidence sat on the coffee table, closed but perfectly positioned. The kids were staying overnight with my parents, giving me the privacy I needed to have this out with her. "Hey, Chris," Lisa called from upstairs. "Do you mind if I leave a little earlier tonight? I want to pick up some wine on the way." "Sure," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Come downstairs first, I need to talk to you." I could hear her hesitation in the silence that followed. Then, her footsteps echoed down the stairs, casual and deliberate. When she entered the living room, her smile faltered at the sight of me sitting on the couch, the folder in plain view. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone cautious but tinged with annoyance. She was still holding her purse, keys dangling from her fingers. "Sit down," I said. My voice was calm, but the steel behind it was unmistakable. She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the folder before meeting mine. "Chris, if this is about—" "Sit," I interrupted, pointing to the armchair across from me. Lisa set her purse down and lowered herself into the chair, her expression carefully neutral. "Okay. What's going on?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I know about Jason." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. For a split second, her mask slipped. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened slightly as if to protest. Then she snapped it back into place, forcing a laugh. "Jason? From work? Chris, what are you talking about?" I reached for the folder, opening it and laying the photos out on the table one by one. Lisa's face paled as she took them in, her and Jason at the wine bar, holding hands, kissing, walking into a hotel. The hotel receipt was the final nail in the coffin. "You want to try again?" I asked, my tone icy. Lisa stared at the photos, her hands trembling. For a moment, I thought she might try to deny it again, but then she let out a shaky breath and slumped back in the chair. "Okay," she said quietly. "You're right. I've been seeing Jason." The admission, though expected, hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a flash of rage, but I forced myself to stay composed. This wasn't about emotions anymore, it was about strategy. "How long?" I asked. 6 months, she admitted. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "It just happened." I scoffed. 6 months of sneaking around, lying to my face, using book club as an excuse. That doesn't just happen, Lisa. That's a choice. Repeated choices. She looked away, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. "You've been meeting him in hotels. You've been letting him kiss you, touch you, while I stayed home with the kids, trusting you. Don't you dare pretend you didn't want this." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "Not anymore." "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, leaning back. "I'll be filing for divorce first thing Monday morning. I'll be seeking full custody of the kids. And you will not fight me on this." Her head shot up, panic flashing across her face. "Chris, wait. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix, Lisa," I interrupted. "You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." "But what about the kids?" she pleaded. "They need both of us. They need stability," I shot back. "And you've proven you can't provide that." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly squashed it. Her tears didn't erase what she'd done. They didn't undo the months of betrayal or the lies she'd told. After a few minutes, she looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Chris, please. I made a mistake, but I love you. I love our family. Don't throw it all away." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I'd married. The truth was, I couldn't see her anymore. All I saw was the person who had torn our family apart. "You already threw it away, Lisa," I said, standing up. "This conversation is over." She didn't try to stop me as I walked out of the living room. I went upstairs, shutting the door to our bedroom and locking it behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor and trying to process everything that had just happened. Outside, I could hear her moving around, opening drawers, rustling papers. Then the sound of the front door closing echoed through the house. She was gone. I didn't know where she was going, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't care. Lisa didn't come home that night. At first, I thought it was deliberate, a petty attempt to punish me for daring to confront her. I waited up for hours, pacing the house, the empty silence pressing in around me. Her betrayal had torn apart the foundation of our family, but her absence felt like a gaping wound in the structure itself. By the next morning, my anger had morphed into worry. She hadn't called or texted. I told myself she was with Jason, that this was just another night she spent with him, now no longer hiding it. But deep down, a seed of doubt began to grow. Around midday, the kids came home from my parents' house, full of energy and questions. "Where's Mom?" Emma asked, her big, curious eyes scanning the room. "She's out," I replied, forcing a smile. "She'll be back later." I didn't believe it, but I didn't know what else to say. As the day stretched into evening, the worry became unbearable. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. And again. Nothing. By nightfall, I was calling hospitals. The dread in my chest expanded with each passing hour. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. Finally, just after midnight, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped, hope surging as I rushed to the door, expecting to find Lisa standing there, maybe contrite, maybe defiant, but alive. Instead, two police officers stood on my porch, their faces grave. "Mr. Hall?" one of them asked. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "May we come in?" I nodded, stepping aside to let them enter. The younger officer cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "We're sorry to inform you," he began, "that your wife, Lisa Hall, was involved in a car accident earlier this evening." The room seemed to tilt. My legs felt unsteady beneath me. "Is she okay?" I managed to ask, even though I already knew the answer. The officer hesitated before shaking his head. "She didn't survive. Her car went off the road and struck a tree. She was pronounced dead at the scene." I felt the air leave my lungs. It was as if the world had stopped spinning, leaving me suspended in a void of disbelief and pain. "There's more," the older officer said gently. "We found an open bottle of wine in the passenger seat. It appears she had been drinking." The words barely registered. "Lisa, gone. It didn't seem real. It couldn't be real." "Thank you," I mumbled, unsure what else to say. The officers left after expressing their condolences, but their words felt hollow, meaningless. I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, staring at nothing. My mind replayed our last conversation over and over again, the anger, the accusations, her tearful pleas. I told her it was over, that I didn't care where she went. And now she was gone. The kids didn't understand at first. When I told them the next morning, Emma burst into tears, clutching me tightly as if I might vanish too. Noah was quiet, his small face pale and confused. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, my own voice breaking. The days that followed were a blur of arrangements and apologies, calls to Lisa's family, organizing the funeral, explaining to friends and neighbors what had happened. I tried to focus on the practical tasks, but the guilt was suffocating. In quieter moments, I found myself replaying every memory of Lisa. The early days of our marriage, the laughter we shared, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the future. I had loved her once, deeply. And despite everything, part of me still did. At the funeral, Jason showed up. He stood at the back of the church, his face pale and haunted. Our eyes met for a moment, but neither of us spoke. What could I possibly say? That I blamed him? That I blamed myself? After the service, as people filtered out, he approached me. "Chris," he began, his voice shaky. Don't," I said, cutting him off. "Just don't." He nodded, his shoulders sagging, and left without another word. In the weeks that followed, life became a routine of survival. I focused on the kids, trying to give them some sense of stability. But every time I walked into the living room and saw the empty space where Lisa used to sit, the pain resurfaced. One night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice small, "do you think Mom was sad when it happened?" Her question broke something inside me. I pulled her close, holding her tightly as my own tears fell. "I don't know, sweetie," I whispered. "I hope not." But I couldn't stop wondering. Had Lisa been driving recklessly because of me? Because of what I'd said? Because I'd turned her away when she needed me most? The guilt became a shadow that followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of what I had lost, not just Lisa, but the chance to make things right. In the end, the life I had built, the steady, stable, dependable life, was shattered. And no matter how much I tried to rebuild, the cracks remained, a testament to the choices that had led us here. Lisa was gone. And so was the man I used to be.